The morning Ethan Carter became a billionaire began like every other morning for the past 10 years, with exhaustion. The sun had barely risen over Manhattan when Ethan stepped out of a black armored SUV and entered the towering glass headquarters of Carter Global. Employees immediately straightened their backs. Executives stopped talking. Assistants moved out of his path. Not because Ethan demanded it, because success had a gravity of its own. And Ethan Carter was one of the most successful men in America. At 38 years old, he had built Carter Global from a struggling startup operating out of a rented warehouse into a multinational technology empire valued in the billions. Financial magazines called him a visionary. Business networks called him a genius. His competitors called him dangerous. The truth was much simpler. Ethan was obsessed. Obsessed with winning. Obsessed with building. Obsessed with proving everyone wrong, especially the people who said he would never amount to anything. As he crossed the lobby, giant television screens displayed breaking financial news. Carter Global finalizes $1 billion acquisition. Ethan Carter closes biggest deal of the year. Wall Street celebrates historic merger. Employees applauded when they saw him. Ethan acknowledged them with a polite nod. Nothing more. His mind was already focused on the next challenge, the next problem, the next goal, because that was how he lived. Always chasing something, always climbing, never stopping. His executive assistant, Melissa, hurried beside him carrying a tablet. Congratulations, Ethan. Thank you. The media is going crazy. They usually do. CNBC wants an interview.
No.
Bloomberg wants an exclusive.
No.
Fox Business wants.
No.
Melissa laughed. I figured. The elevator doors opened. Together they stepped inside. The doors closed. Silence filled the space. For the first time all morning, Ethan allowed himself a moment to breathe. $1 billion. 10 years of work. Thousands of sleepless nights. Hundreds of failed deals. Countless sacrifices. And today had all paid off. Or at least that's what everyone believed. The elevator reached the 48th floor. The executive level. The doors opened to another round of applause. Champagne bottles popped. Employees cheered. A banner stretched across the hallway. Congratulations, Ethan. Someone handed him a glass. Someone else asked for a photo. Investors were already arriving. Board members were smiling. Everything looked perfect. Yet Ethan felt strangely empty. He couldn't explain why. Maybe because success never felt the way people imagined it would. You spent years chasing a dream. Then the moment arrived. And suddenly it became normal. Just another achievement. Just another finish line. Just another mountain conquered. The celebration followed him all the way to the boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan. The skyline glittered beneath a bright blue sky. Around the massive conference table sat the most powerful people in his company. They raised their glasses. To Ethan. To Carter Global. To the future. Everyone cheered. Ethan smiled politely,
Then sat down.
The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Financial forecasts. Growth projections. Shareholder presentations. Media strategy. Future acquisitions. Every number looked incredible. The acquisition would nearly double the company's value. Investors were ecstatic. The board was thrilled. By noon, Carter Global stock had jumped 12%. Analysts predicted even more growth. From the outside, Ethan Carter appeared to have everything. Money,
Power.
respect,
Success.
What nobody saw was the cost. His phone vibrated. A text message appeared. Vanessa, are you free today? Ethan stared at the screen. For a moment, guilt washed over him. Vanessa, his wife of 12 years. The woman who had supported him before he became successful. Before the money. Before the fame. Before the billion-dollar deals. Back when they lived in a tiny apartment with broken heating and secondhand furniture. She had believed in him when nobody else did. And over the years, he had slowly forgotten that. Not intentionally, just gradually. One late meeting became another. One canceled dinner became 10. One missed vacation became 5. Work always came first. The company always came first. There was always another emergency, another opportunity, another deal, another reason. Ethan typed a quick response. Busy today. Big closing. We can celebrate tonight. Several minutes passed. Then a reply arrived.
Okay.
See you later. Something about the message felt cold, different. But Ethan pushed the feeling aside. He had bigger things to worry about. Or so he thought. By late afternoon, the celebration had reached its peak. News stations were running special segments about Carter Global. Financial websites called the merger historic. Investors sent gifts. Partners sent congratulations. $1 billion. Everyone kept repeating the number. $1 billion. $1 billion. $1 billion. As if the amount itself were magical. At 5 o'clock, Ethan finally escaped to his private office. For the first time all day, he was alone. The office occupied the corner of the building. Glass walls provided a breathtaking view of Manhattan. The Hudson River sparkled in the distance. Helicopters crossed the skyline. Traffic crawled through the streets below. Ethan loosened his tie and sat behind his desk. The silence felt wonderful. For several minutes, he simply stared out the window, thinking, reflecting, wondering why victory felt so lonely. Then the office door opened. Ethan looked up. A smile appeared immediately. Vanessa. She stood in the doorway, wearing an elegant white suit. Beautiful as always. Her dark hair framed her face perfectly. For a brief moment, Ethan felt relieved. Maybe she had come to celebrate. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe they could finally reconnect. Maybe. Then he noticed the leather folder in her hands. The smile disappeared.
Slowly.
Instantly. Because deep down, before she said a single word, Ethan already knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Vanessa walked toward his desk.
Calm. Composed.
Emotionless. She placed the folder in front of him. The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan, she said quietly, we need to talk. And just like that, the greatest day of his professional life became the beginning of the worst day of his. For several long seconds, neither Ethan nor Vanessa spoke. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls of the office. Helicopters moved across the skyline. Traffic crawled through Manhattan. Somewhere below, reporters were still celebrating the billion-dollar acquisition. But inside Ethan's office, the atmosphere had completely changed. Vanessa stood in front of his desk.
Calm.
Collected. Almost detached. Ethan looked at her carefully. Something felt wrong. Not angry wrong. Not emotional wrong. Planned wrong. The leather folder rested between them like a loaded weapon. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. What is this? Vanessa took a slow breath, then met his eyes. Divorce papers. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. Not because he didn't see problems in the marriage.
He did.
Not because they hadn't argued.
They had.
Not because he thought everything was perfect. It wasn't.
But divorce? Today?
Of all days? His eyes drifted down toward the folder, then back to her. You're serious? Vanessa gave a small nod. I am. Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to process what was happening. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. His billion-dollar victory no longer seemed important. Why today? He asked quietly. Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's your question? It seems relevant. No, Ethan. She shook her head. What's relevant is the fact that I've spent 12 years married to a man who loves his company more than his wife. The accusation hung in the air, and what made it painful was that Ethan couldn't immediately deny it, because part of it was true. Vanessa continued. You missed anniversaries. I know. You missed birthdays. I know. You cancel vacations. I know. You answer business calls during dinner. Ethan lowered his eyes. I know. For a moment, genuine sadness flashed across Vanessa's face. The kind of sadness that comes from being disappointed for too long. I stopped competing with your company years ago, she said softly. I realized I would never win. The words landed like punches, because Ethan remembered. He remembered promising things would get better. He remembered promising more balance.
More time.
More effort. More everything. Promises he rarely kept. Yet something still felt off. Vanessa wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She wasn't heartbroken. She looked
Prepared.
as if she had rehearsed this conversation 100 times. As if the outcome was already decided. Ethan studied her carefully. When did you decide this? Her answer came immediately. Months ago. That surprised him. Months? She had been planning this for months? While smiling at dinners. While attending company events. While pretending everything was normal. The realization stung. More than he expected. Vanessa reached for the folder. You should read it. Ethan remained silent. She pushed it toward him. The lawyers handled everything. Lawyers. Plural. Not a lawyer. Lawyers. Meaning this wasn't emotional. This was strategic. Professional. Calculated. The kind of divorce wealthy people fought. Not ordinary couples. Slowly, Ethan opened the folder. The first few pages looked standard. Property division. Financial disclosures. Settlement requests. Nothing unusual. Nothing shocking. Vanessa sat across from him. Watching. Waiting. Almost like she expected a specific reaction. Ethan continued reading. Page after page. Then something caught his attention. A paragraph buried deep within the financial section. His eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. Very interesting. He kept reading. The request wasn't just aggressive. It was incredibly specific. Almost suspiciously specific. The document referenced several corporate holdings connected to Carter Global. Not public holdings. Private ones. Confidential ones. Entities that very few people even knew existed. Ethan's expression didn't change. Years in business had taught him how to hide emotions. Inside, however, alarm bells were ringing. Loudly. Vanessa noticed his silence. You okay? Ethan looked up. Then smiled politely. Fine. She relaxed. Just a little. And that tiny reaction told Ethan everything. She expected resistance. She expected arguments. She expected shock. Instead, she was getting calm. And that made her nervous. Interesting. Very interesting. Vanessa stood. I'll have my attorney contact yours. Ethan closed the folder. That's it. She blinked. What do you mean? 12 years. His voice remained calm. 12 years together, and this conversation lasts 5 minutes. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. Only briefly. Then it vanished. There's nothing left to say. Ethan looked at her. Really looked at her. The woman he had loved for over a decade. The woman who knew all his secrets. All his fears. All his dreams. Or, at least he thought she did. Suddenly, she felt like a stranger. I hope you find what you're looking for, Vanessa. The response clearly wasn't what she expected. She frowned. Then nodded. You too. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. The sound of her heels echoed across the office. Each step feeling strangely final. She reached the doorway.
Paused.
For a second Ethan thought she might turn around. Might say something. Anything. Instead, she simply opened the door and left. The office fell silent. Completely silent. Ethan stared at the closed door. Minutes passed. Then he looked back down at the folder. Specifically, at one page. One paragraph. One tiny detail. The divorce filing contained information Vanessa should never have known. Information protected by multiple confidentiality agreements. Information accessible only to a handful of executives. And yet there it was. Right in front of him. His billion-dollar merger. His private holdings. His protected assets. Someone had talked. Someone had leaked information. And suddenly Ethan realized something chilling. This wasn't just a divorce. This was an operation. Carefully planned. Carefully timed. And whoever helped Vanessa believed they understood his finances. What they didn't know was that the most important document connected to the billion-dollar deal wasn't in this folder. It wasn't in the company's records. And it definitely wasn't in the hands of Vanessa's lawyers. It was hidden somewhere else. A second agreement. A second page. One capable of changing everything. Ethan slowly picked up his phone. Then dialed a number from memory. The call connected almost immediately. A deep voice answered. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan's expression hardened. "For the first time all day. I need you to come to my office." "Is something wrong?" Ethan glanced at the divorce papers, then at the Manhattan skyline beyond the glass. His eyes became cold, focused, dangerously calm. "Yes." A long pause followed. Then he spoke 4 words that would change everything. "I think I've been betrayed." The call lasted less than 30 seconds. But by the time Ethan Carter ended it, his entire mindset had changed. The heartbroken husband was gone. The billionaire CEO remained. For years, people had underestimated Ethan because of how calm he appeared. Investors saw a polished executive. Journalists saw a business genius. Competitors saw a wealthy entrepreneur. Very few people understood what Ethan really was: a strategist. And strategists survived by asking one question: who benefits? Ethan stood and walked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Night had begun settling over the city. The skyscrapers glowed like towers of gold. Traffic lights stretched endlessly through the streets below. Normally, he loved this view.
Tonight it felt different.
Tonight it looked like a battlefield. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." The office door opened. A tall, silver-haired man stepped inside. David Reynolds, former federal investigator, current head of Carter Global's Internal Security Division. For the past 8 years, David had quietly handled every threat directed at Ethan or the company: corporate espionage, blackmail, data theft, extortion. If something dangerous existed, David found it and removed it. David closed the door behind him. "You sounded serious." Ethan slid the divorce folder across the desk. "Read page 14. David opened the file. His eyes moved quickly across the document, then slowed, then stopped completely. A frown appeared. "That's odd." Ethan nodded. "Keep reading." Another minute passed. Finally, David looked up. "How does she know about Apex Holdings?" That was exactly the question. Apex Holdings wasn't public information. It wasn't listed anywhere. Shareholders didn't know. The media didn't know. Even most board members didn't know. Apex Holdings existed specifically to protect Carter Global's most valuable assets. Only 4 people had access to those records:
Ethan,
his chief legal officer, his chief financial officer, and the outside attorney who structured the merger. Nobody else. David closed the folder. Someone leaked information. Exactly. And Vanessa's lawyers used it. Ethan crossed his arms. The question is why? Silence settled between them. Neither liked the answer forming in their minds. Because accidental leaks didn't look like this. This felt intentional. Targeted.
planned.
David leaned forward. "What aren't you telling me?" Ethan walked around his desk, then opened a locked cabinet hidden behind a bookshelf. Inside sat a black leather portfolio. He removed it carefully, placed it on the desk, and opened it. David's eyes widened immediately.
Oh,
Ethan nodded. Exactly. Inside the portfolio sat the real merger agreement. Not the public version. The private version. The version nobody knew about. Including Vanessa. Including her lawyers. Including whoever was helping them. David slowly flipped through the pages. Then stopped. Page 2. The page. The hidden page. The page that changed everything. 3 months earlier, while negotiating the billion-dollar acquisition, Ethan had followed advice from his legal team. Instead of directly owning the majority of the new assets, ownership had been transferred into a protected holding structure before the merger officially closed. Perfectly legal. Perfectly documented. Perfectly hidden. The billion-dollar announcement everyone celebrated today was mostly optics. The real transaction had occurred weeks ago, and because it happened before the divorce filing, the assets were protected. Completely protected. David let out a low whistle. So, they think they're coming after $1 billion. Ethan smiled slightly. $1 billion that technically doesn't exist. For the first time all evening, a small sense of satisfaction appeared. Not because Vanessa would lose. Because someone had clearly tried to manipulate him. And failed. David closed the portfolio. They never saw page 2.
No.
And they built their entire strategy around incomplete information. Looks that way. David leaned back, his investigator instincts fully activated now. This isn't about divorce anymore. Ethan's expression hardened. No, it wasn't. A normal divorce would have hurt. This felt different. This felt like an attack. Someone had provided confidential information. Someone believed they could exploit the end of his marriage for profit. Someone had turned a personal tragedy into a business opportunity. And Ethan wanted to know who. David pulled out his phone. What do you want me to do? Ethan didn't hesitate. Start with the leak. Everyone. David nodded. The investigation began immediately. Within hours, Carter Global's internal security team was reviewing communications, phone records, emails, financial transactions, private meetings, anything unusual, anything suspicious. By midnight, Ethan remained alone in his office. The building had mostly emptied. The celebration was over. The champagne bottles were gone. The applause had faded. Only silence remained. He loosened his tie and sat in darkness. For the first time all day, his thoughts drifted back to Vanessa. Not the divorce. The memories. The beginning. 12 years earlier, they had met in a coffee shop near Columbia University. Ethan had been broke, ambitious, unknown. Vanessa had been working 2 jobs while finishing graduate school. Neither had money. Neither had connections. Neither had power. They only had each other. Back then, life seemed simpler. They laughed more, dreamed more, loved more. Somewhere along the way, things changed. Success arrived. Then pressure. Then distance. Then silence. And now, divorce. The realization hurt more than Ethan wanted to admit. Despite everything, he never wanted this ending. A vibration interrupted his thoughts. His phone lit up. David. Ethan answered immediately. What did you find? Silence. Then David spoke. His voice sounded different. Tighter. More serious. We have a problem. Ethan sat upright. What kind of problem? Another pause. Then came the words that made his blood run cold. Vanessa isn't acting alone. The office suddenly felt very quiet. Ethan's jaw tightened. Who? We're still confirming it.
Tell me.
David took a breath, then said a name Ethan hadn't heard in years. A name that instantly transformed suspicion into certainty. Richard Hale. Ethan froze. For a moment, he thought he misheard. Richard Hale. His former business rival. The man who had spent years trying to destroy Carter Global. The man who lost millions competing against Ethan. The man who publicly blamed Ethan for his company's collapse. A dangerous man. A bitter man. A man with every reason to seek revenge. David's voice returned. We found multiple communications between Vanessa and Hale's private office. Ethan slowly stood, his expression becoming colder with every second. How many communications? Dozens. And how long? The answer hit like a hammer. Almost 8 months. 8 months. 8 months of meetings. 8 months of conversations. 8 months of secrets. 8 months of betrayal. Outside the office windows, Manhattan glittered beneath the night sky. Beautiful. Cold. Merciless. Much like the truth. Ethan ended the call and stared into the darkness. The divorce papers were no longer sitting on his desk. They were evidence. And for the first time since Vanessa walked into his office that afternoon, Ethan finally understood what was really happening. This wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the opening move of a war. And whoever started it had just made one catastrophic mistake. They assumed Ethan Carter only read page 1. They never imagined he would be the author of page 2. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the lights were still on in Ethan Carter's office. Most of Manhattan slept. Ethan didn't. Neither did David Reynolds. The conference room next to Ethan's office had been transformed into a war room. Computer screens covered the walls. Financial records filled the tables. Investigators moved in and out carrying folders, tablets, and printed reports. Coffee cups accumulated by the dozen. The atmosphere felt less like a corporate investigation and more like a federal criminal probe. Because the deeper they looked, the uglier things became. Ethan stood near the largest screen in the room, arms crossed. His expression remained calm. But everyone who worked closely with him knew the truth. He was furious. Not explosive fury. Not emotional fury. The dangerous kind. The silent kind. The kind that spent weeks planning instead of minutes reacting. David entered carrying a thick black folder. "We've confirmed it." Ethan looked up. "Richard Hale?" David nodded. Without question. The folder landed on the conference table. Inside were photographs, phone logs, bank records, travel receipts, meeting schedules, months of evidence. Ethan opened the file. The first photograph showed Vanessa leaving a private restaurant. Across from her sat Richard Hale. The image was dated 7 months earlier. Ethan's jaw tightened. Another photo. Another meeting. Different location. Same people. Another. Another. The pattern was impossible to ignore. David pointed toward one of the documents. These weren't random meetings. Ethan remained silent. They met at least 19 times. 19? Confirmed. A heavy silence settled over the room. 19 meetings. Not one. Not two. 19. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't friendship. That was planning. Months of planning. Ethan slowly turned another page. A financial report appeared. His eyes narrowed immediately. "What is this?" David took a breath. "This is where things get interesting." The report showed a series of wire transfers. Small amounts at first. 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. Then larger. Much larger. Over 6 months, nearly $2 million had moved through a network of consulting firms connected to Richard Hale. The money eventually landed in accounts controlled by Vanessa's legal team. Ethan stared at the numbers. For several moments, he said nothing. Finally, he looked up. "He paid for the divorce." David nodded. "It appears that way." A cold smile appeared on Ethan's face. Not because he was happy. Because things finally made sense. The timing. The confidence. The aggressive demands. The hidden financial knowledge. The carefully prepared paperwork. None of it happened naturally. Someone had built this strategy. Someone had financed it. Someone had fed Vanessa information she shouldn't have known. And that someone was Richard Hale, one of Ethan's oldest enemies. Across the room, an investigator raised his hand. "We found something else." Everyone turned. The investigator connected his laptop to the main screen. An email chain appeared. Hundreds of messages. Most were encrypted. Some had been deleted. Others were covered. The room grew quiet. The investigator clicked one message. Richard Hale's name appeared. Then another. And another. Then Vanessa's. Ethan felt something sink in his chest. Not anger. Disappointment. The kind that comes when hope finally dies. For months he had told himself there must be an explanation. A misunderstanding. A mistake. Something. Anything. But the evidence kept growing. And every piece pointed in the same direction. Vanessa wasn't being manipulated. She was participating. Voluntarily. David highlighted one message. "You should read this." Ethan stepped closer. The email was dated 4 months earlier. Richard had written, "Once the merger closes, file immediately. Don't give him time to restructure anything." The room fell silent. Another email. "My attorneys believe you can claim nearly half." Another. "Make sure he doesn't know you're aware of Apex Holdings." Another. "The billion-dollar deal is the perfect opportunity." Ethan looked away from the screen. His expression remained controlled. But inside, something broke. Not because of the money. The money was irrelevant. The protected holding structure already secured most of the assets. Richard and Vanessa had targeted the wrong fortune.
No.
What hurt was something else.
Trust.
For 12 years, Vanessa had known everything about him. His fears, his weaknesses, his ambitions, his insecurities. And now she had weaponized that knowledge. The realization felt brutal. David noticed the change immediately. "You okay?" Ethan laughed softly. A humorless laugh.
No.
Nobody in the room knew how to respond.
Because what could you say?
Congratulations? Your wife betrayed you? At least you're still rich? There was no comforting version of this story. Only reality. And reality wasn't kind. Hours passed. The investigation continued. By sunrise, the picture was complete. Richard Hale hadn't simply encouraged the divorce. He had engineered it. After losing several major contracts to Carter Global, Richard's own company began collapsing. Investors fled. Partners abandoned him. Debt piled up. Desperation followed. Then opportunity appeared. Vanessa Carter. A lonely wife. An unhappy marriage. A billionaire husband. Richard saw an opening.
And he exploited it.
Slowly.
Carefully.
Patiently. Months of conversations became trust. Trust became influence. Influence became strategy. Strategy became betrayal. When David finished presenting the final report, the room remained silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Finally, Ethan stood. He walked toward the giant windows overlooking Manhattan. The city glowed beneath the morning sun. Millions of people beginning their day, completely unaware that his life had just changed forever. Behind him, David closed the final folder. What do you want to do? The question lingered. Everyone waited, because the answer mattered. This wasn't merely personal anymore. It was legal,
Corporate.
financial, potentially criminal. Ethan stared at the skyline, then smiled. A small smile. A dangerous smile. The kind Richard Hale would have recognized immediately. The kind competitors feared, because it usually meant Ethan had already found a solution. They think they won. David nodded. They do. They think the divorce is leverage. Correct. They think they understand my finances. Correct. Ethan turned around. His eyes were calm again. Focused.
Sharp.
The heartbreak remained. But something else had replaced the shock.
Purpose.
Strategy.
Control.
They built their entire plan around one assumption. David folded his arms. Which assumption? Ethan walked back to the conference table, picked up the merger file, and opened it directly to page 2. The page nobody knew about. The page nobody saw. The page capable of destroying everything Richard and Vanessa believed. A slow smile spread across his face. They assumed they were reading the whole story. Silence filled the room. Then Ethan closed the file. A loud snap echoed through the conference room. Prepare everything. David raised an eyebrow. For the divorce hearing? Ethan shook his head.
No.
His voice became cold, precise, unshakable. For the day Richard Hale realizes he picked the wrong man to betray. And for the first time since Vanessa walked into his office with divorce papers, Ethan wasn't reacting anymore. He was planning, and that was far more dangerous. 3 months later, the divorce hearing became the most talked about legal proceeding in New York's business circles. Reporters packed the courthouse. Financial journalists filled the front rows. Investors watched from live streams. Even rival CEOs quietly followed every development. After all, this wasn't just a divorce. It involved a billionaire, a billion-dollar merger, and a marriage that had collapsed in spectacular fashion. Outside the courthouse, camera flashes exploded nonstop. News anchors delivered live updates. Speculation flooded social media. Most people believed they already knew the outcome. Vanessa Carter would walk away with a fortune. Richard Hale would finally get his revenge. And Ethan Carter would learn that even billionaires could bleed. At least that was the story everyone expected. Unfortunately for them, they had never seen page 2. Inside courtroom 7, Ethan sat calmly beside his legal team. A tailored navy suit, silver tie, perfect posture, no visible emotion. Across the aisles sat Vanessa, elegant, confident, expensive. She looked like someone already planning her victory celebration. Beside her sat a team of high-priced attorneys. Behind her sat Richard Hale. Officially, he was there as an observer. Unofficially, everyone knew why he had come. To watch Ethan lose. The sight of him made several reporters whisper excitedly. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The hearing began. Vanessa's lead attorney rose first. For nearly an hour, He presented their case. 12 years of marriage, shared sacrifices, emotional damages, financial contributions. Then came the real objective, the money, specifically the billion-dollar merger. The attorney confidently displayed charts and financial summaries. He spoke as if victory was guaranteed, as if the assets were already theirs, as if the battle had already been won. Throughout the presentation, Vanessa occasionally glanced toward Ethan, waiting for a reaction. Any reaction. She found none. Ethan simply listened, quietly, patiently, the way a chess player watches an opponent make the wrong move. When the attorney finally finished, he sat down looking extremely satisfied. The judge adjusted her glasses. Mr. Carter's counsel? Ethan's attorney slowly stood. Margaret Collins, one of the most feared corporate litigators in America. She didn't rush. She didn't dramatize. She simply walked to the center of the courtroom, placed a folder on the evidence table,
and smiled.
a very small smile. "Your Honor," she began, "the petitioner has built an impressive argument." Vanessa's attorneys looked pleased. Then Margaret continued, "Unfortunately, the argument is built upon assets my client does not legally own." The room immediately became quieter. The judge frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret opened the folder, then removed a document. A single document. The document. Page 2. "Our response begins with a complete merger agreement." Vanessa's attorney immediately stood. "We already reviewed the merger agreement." "No," Margaret replied calmly. "You reviewed page 1. The confidence vanished from Vanessa's face. Just slightly. Just enough for Ethan to notice. Margaret approached the judge, handed over the document, then waited. The judge began reading. 10 seconds passed.
20. 30.
Suddenly her expression changed. She flipped back to the first page, then forward again, then back. The courtroom became completely silent. Everyone sensed something important had happened. Finally, the judge looked up. "Interesting." That single word caused panic on Vanessa's side of the courtroom. Her attorney immediately requested a copy. The judge handed it over. The attorney read, then froze. Exactly as the judge had. Across the room, Richard Hale leaned forward.
Confused.
Concerned. For the first time all morning, he no longer looked comfortable. Margaret turned toward the court. 3 weeks before the public merger announcement, Mr. Carter legally transferred the majority of the protected assets into a separate holding structure. She pointed toward the document. The transfer was completed before the divorce filing. The judge nodded slowly. "Meaning?" Margaret smiled. "Meaning the assets being claimed in this proceeding are not marital property." Silence. Absolute silence. Vanessa's face went pale. Her attorney began flipping frantically through the document. Again, searching desperately for an angle, a loophole, anything. There was nothing, because everything had been done legally, perfectly, months earlier, long before the divorce papers appeared. Richard Hale's expression darkened. For the first time, Ethan saw genuine fear in his rival's eyes. And they weren't finished yet. Margaret reached for another folder. This court should also be aware of additional evidence. The judge looked interested. What evidence? Margaret placed several documents on the screen. Emails, bank transfers, meeting records, photographs. One by one they appeared before the courtroom. The atmosphere changed immediately. Vanessa stopped breathing. Richard Hale looked sick. The reporters nearly fell out of their seats. Margaret's voice remained calm. The petitioner was not acting independently. The first email appeared. Then another. Then another. Every secret communication between Vanessa and Richard. Every strategy discussion. Every financial transfer. Every attempt to exploit confidential corporate information. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to take notes. Lawyers whispered urgently. The judge slammed her gavel. Order. Nobody listened. The evidence kept appearing. More emails. More transfers. More proof. The story collapsed in real time. Vanessa sat frozen. Her confidence gone. Her victory gone. Her future disappearing piece by piece. Finally, the judge restored order. She looked directly at Vanessa. Then Richard. Then the evidence. Her expression hardened. This is extremely serious. Nobody disagreed. The judge continued reviewing documents for another 20 minutes. When she finally looked up, her decision was obvious. The financial claims presented by the petitioner are denied. Vanessa closed her eyes, as if the words physically hurt. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, based upon the evidence presented today, this court is referring multiple matters for further investigation regarding corporate misconduct and unlawful acquisition of confidential financial information. Richard Hale looked like he had been punched. Several reporters immediately rushed from the courtroom to break the story. Margaret returned to her seat. Her job finished. The courtroom slowly emptied. People whispered, pointed, speculated. The story would dominate headlines for weeks. Yet Ethan barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on one person, Vanessa. For a moment, she stood alone near the exit. The same woman he had loved for 12 years. The same woman who had once believed in him before anyone else. Looking at her now, Ethan felt something unexpected. Not anger, not satisfaction, just sadness. Because no matter how ugly the ending became, there had once been love here. Real love. Vanessa finally looked at him. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The marriage was over. The betrayal was exposed. The truth had won. Slowly, she turned and walked away. This time for good. Ethan watched until she disappeared. Then he gathered his documents and headed toward the courthouse exit. Outside, thousands of camera flashes exploded. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones stretched toward him. Ethan, did you know about the betrayal? Will Richard Hale face charges? How long did you know about Page 2? Ethan paused at the top of the courthouse steps. The city stretched before him.
Bright.
Chaotic.
Alive.
For a moment, he thought about everything he had lost. Then he thought about everything he had learned. $1 billion deal had made him richer. But betrayal had made him wiser. Finally, he looked toward the cameras and smiled. A calm,
Confident.
unshakable smile. The most expensive mistakes in life, he said quietly, usually happen when people think they've read the whole contract. Then he walked away, leaving behind the cameras, the headlines, the betrayal, and the woman who never saw Page 2.